Hi, I'm Paul Hefner, and I'm doing a quick recording as a practice session for a presentation I'm giving tomorrow for the Colorado CPA group. Let's see, let me make my screen bigger here and close this. I'm representing the Independent Accountants Alliance group. I'm one of the co-chairs with Tiffany and Joe. And we were asked to come up with a topic to present, and I am super excited about Claude Cowork, so I'm going to give a presentation on that. This is a picture of me and my family. I own a firm called Finance Pals, and here's a brief agenda of sort of what we're going to go through today. It's is a little bit explaining about Claude Cowork, and then most of the presentation is giving some real world examples, sort of getting into the weeds on how it actually works, and then talking through security, some tips and tricks, and then questions and discussion. I think there's a lot of people who are brand new to Cowork, and so this presentation is for you, and then a lot of people who are using it. We'd love to hear sort of what you're already using it for. And I think understanding some of those other use cases is super valuable. And anytime we start talking about AI, there's always lots of questions and other things people are doing. So I love hearing all of those things. So just a few really quick background slides. So Claude is an AI tool. It's actually an agent that goes in and actually updates files directly on your computer. It has to be downloaded to your computer and installed, and then you sort of run it to do tasks on your computer. I think the first part is sort of understanding how it's different than chat. So whether you're using ChatGPT or even Claude has a chat feature as well, and understanding sort of what's different. So I think most people are familiar with ChatGPT. So you ask it a question, and then it sends back a response, and for the most part you end up doing the work. So maybe you're drafting an email, you'll say, hey, write me an email that does this, or here's an email, can you make it sound nicer or whatever else, and then ultimately you're sort of then looking at it and then pasting it into the browser and then sending the email. Versus with an agent, it'll do all that for you. If you most people are not having it send emails, but if you wanted it to send emails for you, it would actually send the email for you. Where I'm mainly using it is in Excel, and we'll get into those examples later. I think the bottom sort of explains this. So the chat is sort of like back and forth. I've heard it sort of described as like ping pong. So you ask, it answers. It can create a CSV. It can help you with a formula. But for the most part, you're still sort of updating the spreadsheet, whereas an agent or Cowork will, you give it a task like, create pro forma, and it will go and come up with all the steps like, oh, what do I need to do for pro forma? Like, and then it'll ask questions like, how many years do you want to go out? What sort of assumptions do you need? And it'll use those to then sort of go through its list. And then it will also check its work. It'll say, does the balance sheet balance? And you can see it working. It'll say, oh, the balance sheet doesn't balance. Let me fix that. And it's sort of doing this. I think that the other thing too to think about, I couldn't get an exact answer, but chat is usually responding sort of like in under a minute. An agent might work for 5 to 10 minutes on a task because it's really doing that deep thinking and sort of getting into the weeds and really solving a problem. The first example here is actually created parts of this presentation. And this is the prompt that I put in. Can you create some screenshots or summary of the model into some PowerPoint slides? You can see on the left there, it's asking questions. What's the target audience for this presentation? How many slides are you thinking? And then on the right, you can see it's doing things like it's using Python, saying the slides look overall, there's an issue, and then it fixed the issue, and then it says, here's your presentation. So that's sort of like an example of sort of how it works and how it's a little different. I think this is a super easy sort of just example to see. And then you can see some of the slides throughout the deck as I go. This is all these sort of ones with the blue header there are some of the slides that it created. And this was the first problem. This is not the first problem that I used Claude for. our co-work for, but it was the first one where it just sort of blew my mind away. So this is a slide I created, and it sort of describes the problem of why we were trying to create a fixed fee pricing model. We don't want to underprice, we don't want to overprice. I added in these blue bullets, and really it's a story of, I don't know, pricing is really hard. We had an estimate tool. We kept tweaking it, and then we'd run, whatever inputs we got from it. And we'd say, this client should be $10,000 a month, and it should be a client that, we want to bill like $200 a month for, or vice versa. It was never quite accurate, because there were small clients, there's big clients. I have some other firms that I know. I sort of asked them nicely, can you share your models? And they said no. That it's proprietary, and it took them, years of refining to develop. And then I kept trying to do this, but it was just taking a lot of time, and it never was quite getting to where it needs to go. And then so the solution that it calls out that we're sort of going to walk through is building a regression model, which I don't exactly know what that is, but it used 15 existing clients and GL complexities to get it. This is the initial prompt. And I think one thing I forgot to mention earlier, when you're thinking of chat, there was a lot of emphasis and like building out the perfect prompt. And I need to add this to the other slide. And there was all this thing like prompt engineering and trying to have this prompt where then you can copy and paste it and do it over and over again, and trying to come up with this. For Claude Cowork, it's much simpler. You can obviously spend a lot of time and have these prompts, but it actually can save some of these things. It can build skills, and it can do all these things where you're sort of doing it, but you can also ask it, very unspecified questions. This is a longer prompt than I would normally give it, and you can add context and different things. So I wouldn't have had to say, hey, I run an accounting firm, but this is before I added some of that stuff in there, and I still haven't added that stuff in there. But anyway, so I just wanted to call out that there's different use of prompts, but basically this is giving an idea of what I'm sort of asking it to do. And I said, can you create, I have some timesheet reports. Can you figure out the hours spent on each of these services? And then as a later step, I can upload some GL details and sort of determine the inputs. And then I gave some pricing stuff. And then let me know what questions you have. I don't have all the questions that it asked, but here's sort of the initial sort of responses that it came back with. So here's some example of some of our timesheet data. I highlighted some things in red to sort of show like, what it was picking up on. And this was just sort of the first task. I was like, I don't know what it's going to come back with. And it said, great, these timesheets are a mess, which, I had sort of realized, but hadn't really put the dots together. And it said, okay, we need to come up with a hierarchy to sort of solve this. And it said, if it mentions payroll, we're going to do that first. If it mentions AR, that's next. AP is next, and then bookkeeping. So it has, if there's nothing left or things like that. And then it had some other great insights. It said, well, if it mentions like payroll, but it's misspelled, or, or invoicing with, spelled INVOIC, it's going to pick those up, which I don't know if I was doing this myself, if I would have even picked that up. But it's trying to filter out, all those notes where people are mistyping stuff. And so by this point, I'm already like, great, it's 2 steps further ahead than I had already gotten on sort of analyzing this timesheet data. It's sort of accounting for misspellings, it's prioritizing the harder time entries, and I'm sort of already excited with what it's going down. And that's sort of the approach I have on all this. You sort of just start it and see where it goes, and then you can sort of iterate and sort of gain momentum and say, yes, this is heading in the right direction. So I'm already, at this point, I'm already excited. So then there's a lot of prompts sort of back and forth. And I sort of also think of this sort of as like, an entry-level employee. So it's like, hey, build me a model, and it builds me a model, and it says, the main input is you say how many hours you're going to work, and then it says this is like what the what it's going to cost, and then so I had to sort of push back and say, okay, well, just like an employee, we need it to be a driver-based model, and so I said, what inputs would you like? And so it selected certain clients that it wanted. Some were high hours, some were low hours, and I sent those general ledgers over. And we kept, oh, sorry, I got to go back to my Google Meet here. I don't know why it pings me like that, but yeah, here. To get it to start to analyze, what these inputs are going to be, I think is what I was saying. And then let's see, we were talking about payroll and salaries. It was asking about employee data, and I said, well, some of this data is in the general ledger data if you look through it. And it says, I looked at it and found it in column F. And then it asked why some clients were even higher. So I gave some qualitative feedback that I got from one of my staff. And it turns out that client just had a lot of rework. It also had a bunch of different staff that were working on it. And so there was some of those things. And then it added some different criteria around if the client uses checks a lot. And then we also, to make it sort of more useful, we added a little bit of a price cushion. So there was a lot of sort of back and forth on it. And I don't know if guessing and checking is the right thing, but it was sort of trying different things and seeing how accurate it was. And then it was sort of refining it. These are some of the slides I put together on sort of analyzing what it actually did. And we won't get into all this. I think the important thing is really understanding, sort of how I'm using Cowork. But it went through almost 16,000 timesheets, 300 clients, 15 GL files. The metrics from the GL, the ones in black are pretty common, like how many bank accounts there are, number of checks, number of journal entries. I had sort of gotten that far, but what it started getting into were, how many unique vendors were there? What's the transactions per vendor? How many different revenue categories are there? So these ones in red are sort of things where it's sort of beating me in terms of, how it was building this model. And then it started, these are sort of the output of it. And again, a lot of this is statistical type stuff. It has the what didn't work at the bottom there, just raw transaction counts, which is how I built a lot of the, my models almost initially always had like how many transactions are in the general ledger. And then, based on that, we would have sort of an hour estimate. It says that didn't work at all, which is why all my previous models did not work. It looked at the transaction types, the journal entries, and all these are different R squared or R values, sort of just describing how accurate or how much those sort of predicted the accuracy of the model. And by the end of it, we went through 7 versions, and it came up with a sort of formula to calculate it. And again, there's not a lot that I want to pull out of the slide, except this is a pretty complicated formula that I don't know if I would have, I don't know, come out with it on my own. Let's see, model assumptions. This is some more of the specific things around AR and AP. It has this TVR, the transaction vendor ratio. It used a rate card that sort of X'd out. It has, oh yeah, let's see. Some other things that it was looking at. And I think it's just good to sort of see sort of where it's going through. This is the slide that I think is the most impressive, and something that was really hard is that then it sort of had a certain number of clients that ran through, and then it back tested it and said, okay, based on our model now, let's look at what the actual hours are, and then let's see what it predicts. And you can see some of the clients are small, some of them are big, and it's it's amazing that for every client it sort of over predicted a little bit, and that's I think one of the reasons I put in a cushion to make sure that it over predicted the hours. But I was super excited about this. then so now we built this a month or so ago, and so we've been using it. This is sort of an example that it gave for one of our clients. We inputted the GL. It went through and said, here's the transaction types, the journal entries, number of employees. So all I did was upload the GL. So this is all GL inputs. And from there, basically said your estimate is 11 hours, and it gave me a price. And from there, I was able to actually use a different Cowork thing to create a contract to say, here's your monthly fee, and send it off. And the success stories, the client signed up, and it was almost double what they were paying their previous bookkeeper. So I was pretty excited about that. The previous bookkeeper was way undercharging. And then we get into some more fun stuff. We had another client come. I didn't do the sales call on this one, but the client basically said they had 100 transactions per month. And then our question is, what would be a good fixed fee? And so it came up with this sort of formula to say, okay, if it's clean, if it's average, if it's messy, it's this. And then they sort of said, for a quick quote, I'd suggest charging X dollars per month. And then we ended up listing off, if based on how many bank accounts you have, it was sort of move the price up or down between these different categories. And we sent this client out. I don't think we won this client, but I don't remember specifically. But the point of it is it's taking something that was sort of a rigorous process before and wasting a lot of time, it made it much simpler and more accurate, which to me is a huge win. I'm trying to think of what else I'm trying to say tomorrow, but yeah. And then as a result of all this, this wasn't something that necessarily said, but it for these slides it said, here's some questions to ask. And I sent this to the other person on my team that does sales, and they said, oh yeah, these are great questions. A lot of them we were sort of already asking, but I don't know anywhere where we were necessarily capturing how many employees were on the payroll or things like that. But so from these types of questions, if we don't get the general ledger, we can make our predictions more accurate. Okay, now for the second project that we did. This was one of this is actually the first one that I did. I actually had a friend sort of help me with the initial prompt, but it's kind of funny. I wrote the word, can you do this pro forma? And then, I gave it some data and said, ask me clarifying questions. It asked about growth rates. This was a client in the pro forma or in the P&L actuals that we sent. It had some year-end cleanup, and it was sort of asking like, why was December so crazy? What happened there? And then we sort of explained that it was some year-end cleanup. It asked about staffing assumptions for the future, and it created a pretty good pro forma. So I'm going to walk you through sort of this. This is another story I'll sort of tell about this client. And I think that the other thing that I highlighted there in red is there was a template. So I think this is, I'll get into the best use cases that I've had, but if you have something where you have something completed and you say, I want it updated for the next month, or you say, here's this thing completed, I want to create something similar with this other data. It does a really good job of sort of looking what you did and then sort of reconstructing it, which I think is a really good use case. So here's some of the just prompts or story of how we did it. So we adjusted some of the growth rates. And then after I was feeling pretty good about the sort of pro forma thing that I built, the client that I was working on had a second location, and I said, great, now build out the pro forma for the second location. And then it did that. And so you think of the first one I did, it probably had, 6 or 7 iterations trying to get the model the way I wanted it. And then for the second location, it just had like 1 iteration. I just said, do the same thing for the second location, and it used all the knowledge that it had built before to build the second one. And then the real problem where this sort of gets, starts to blow my mind, is it was starting to solve a problem that I hadn't quite figured out yet. And this owner was opening 2 additional locations, and they, we needed the pro forma bill for that. And that was the main reason we needed the pro forma bill, is they were raising money to build out these new locations. And so that, hadn't quite figured out how I was going to add the forma for these locations. So that's where we'll sort of get into it. So first, combined location A and B, and then it started asking questions about. Or I said I wanted the summary of certain things like COGS and revenue, and then they're gonna add a manager for each of these locations, which the first two locations were both two different owners were running it, so that was the difference. And then they were launching one in November. They have to order machines 6 months ahead, and then there's different occupancy things. And so that was sort of the prompt around it. And again, the prompt itself isn't as important as it sort of was in chat, but I think I just pasted here because I think people will get an understanding of sort of what I was putting into it, and sort of I wasn't doing any other work besides typing prompts like this. I wasn't updating the spreadsheet. I wasn't doing anything. It was just prompts. And then I clarified some assumptions, like so for there's two locations, what should they use for the the new locations? Are they more like A, or are they more like B as an average? Ask about rent, and all these things. So I'm sort of giving it some input, just the way an employee would ask questions. There's a lot of fine-tuning prompts, which I won't get into, but some of this was more around raising the money, and how much money they needed, and some final corrections. Looks like actually I did update some stuff around some principle, and it was able to then create the model. And this is sort of its summary of what it did. And I like this first slide over on the right. The model structure is 18 tabs, 4 locations, 9,000 formulas. And I remember very specifically, I was sort of updating it, and I was just thinking how long it would, not that it would take me 18 minutes, but it would take me a long time to just, copy each tab, to rename it, this is, location 1, to, all the time that it would take to do that. And I didn't have to do any of that. It's formatting them all, and then it's summarizing across all 18 tabs, I guess all 17 tabs, to this sort of final summary of what it's doing. So it has P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, business summary, and then it has consolidated a bunch of stuff around how much money they need, debt service coverage ratio, things like that. It has a bunch of assumptions, which these aren't super important, but what's interesting is assumptions are clearly documented and adjustable. And we didn't use these for the money raise, but we could have easily had it create. This is a slide that it created, and it we could have used these to create some sort of PowerPoint presentation to send to investors. This is some other fancy looking slides. You can see how the revenue is sort of ramping up for some. It's 0 in 2026, and then it sort of ramps 27 and 28, and then it has gross profit things and net income, and it sort of dips, and then it turns back positive in 2028. So these is you can sort of look at this and say, is the model making sense? And then it has the debt service ratio, and how that's sort of dipping and improving, how it's funded, how much money they need, all different stuff. And we don't need to get into all the assumptions and different things, but I think what's important is that, that it was able to create all this just from really from two different locations, profit loss and balance sheet statement. And then it created, all this fancy model. This is sort of just a graphic. I don't love this chart, but it sort of shows how the new locations aren't positive, or are not positive profit in 26 and 27, then they turn profitable in 2028. This is sort of what the output summary looked like. So it has consolidated cash flows, changing cash by location, debt service coverage ratio, capital requirements, total funding needed, all different things that it's sort of looking through and summarizing into a fancy spreadsheet. Okay. Now we'll get into security and data stuff, which is sort of where a lot of people put up a lot of resistance or worry or different things. So I'll try to do the best I can to sort of explain how I'm thinking about it. If people have other things or questions, would love their input. And I'm definitely not an expert in this area, so I would consult, your IT professional or your insurance provider, probably more your IT person. There's also lots of AI people out there. I have a few friends that are sort of AI consultants, and I get a lot of info from them on sort of what's safe and what's not safe. Most importantly, in red there is don't process any personal information, socials, bank accounts. I don't. Yeah, I would just not do it. I think there's some people out there who might be doing some of those things. But I think just it's better safe than sorry on some of these things, especially for people that have to worry about code 7216. If you're putting that stuff in there, you could end up with misdemeanor fines, imprisonment, and we just want to be as safe as possible. And plus, just you just want to do right by your customers. There are all kinds of different plans for Cowork. We're using the Teams plan. The enterprise plan is for bigger companies, and those are more secure than the Pro and Max plans. There's another slide later where I sort of talk about the different pricing and sort of how it works. Another thing that I didn't quite understand, I asked somebody sort of why the team plan was more secure, and they said it has to do with DPA, the data processing agreement. What has to do with, if something happens, you end up in court, those plans are just supposed to be more secure. Even the not secure one, just the normal website for individuals, has SOC Type 2 compliance. It's ISO 27001 certified, and so it is more secure than you would think. The content, through Cowork is sent to the Anthropic servers for AI processing. We've been working a lot on our WISP, and we're constantly trying to update our data handling and artificial intelligence policies. So that's something that everybody should be thinking about more and more as these tools are getting data. And I would say the one scary thing that I'll think about is like we use Gmail for our email, and the amount of stuff that Gemini is probably reading in our emails that it shouldn't be is probably very concerning, and it's something that we're trying to look into. But we've definitely gone in and adjusted a lot of our Google Workspace settings, and so even if you're not using Cowork, that's something that I might look at as sort of what your settings are for some of those AI tools, even in your email. If you use Microsoft Copilot, similar type things, I think there's a lot of risk in there. I'm just going to make a note to add that on this slide so I can update later. Try to anonymize data when possible, and obviously check state boards, AI CPA. I think these things are going to constantly be changing over the years. So now back to some more fun stuff, tips and tricks. I also started putting some more slides in my family in these last few slides. I think it's kind of fun. I try to use Cowork like an employee. I give a background. I talk about what I want accomplished. And similar to sending an email, I just sort of put it in the prompt instead. And then after I send the prompt, I check my email. Just because, while it's going to take me 5 to 10 minutes, the first few times it's really fun to watch. Like I'm updating Python, I'm doing this thing, I'm checking this thing, I'm using this skill. That's kind of fun to watch, but ultimately we're all busy. So now I sort of send it and then go do a task. And when I come back, the same way if you send an email to an employee, you wouldn't sit there and wait for them to reply. You go do something else and you come back and then it's completed. Best use cases, I mentioned a few of these earlier. You have a template you want updated. I think it does really great at that. I like this one, a hard project that you keep delaying it. I've heard somebody else say this once. They had this really hard thing and they were like, I was working on it and I would have kept putting it off, but it was so fun working on it with Cowork because now I'm learning this tool, I'm doing this thing. and then it sort of helps you accomplish these hard projects. So it's sort of win-win. And then I haven't done this, but if you were just one of those super paranoid people or wanted to sort of see what it does, you could take something you've already completed and run it through and say, okay, does it create the same output that I created, or something that I've already created? Can you check it? Those are some other ways to sort of get comfortable with the tool. But I think the more amazing things if you give it something fresh and say go and work. Another thing is be prepared to sort of iterate and give it feedback on what to improve. The same as if you had an employee. You have this new person that's hiring, they create the first version, you're like, oh, actually I was looking for this. And for me, it's sort of taking about 7 versions. I think there are some things that I could do to reduce that number if I spent more time sort of setting up the context. There's different settings you can put to sort of give Claude background on who you are and what you do. You can create these sort of memory files so that it'll take context from project to project or things like that. I haven't done a lot of those things, but those will reduce it. And then I can obviously spend more time in my prompts. But I am sort of I have more fun just sort of giving it the bare minimum and sort of seeing what it comes up with, because then I feel like it can go in a different direction I might not have thought yet. And it just takes less time to give it, a very general, quick, quick prompt and do it. Some people have things set up where they're, either sending it through their phone or, a voice prompt or different things. But yeah, for me, I am fine iterating with it. And I think just being prepared for that. You might not, if you don't get it perfect the first time, that's expected. And so I think that's important to be aware of. Another one are the tokens and usage limits. So with Cowork, there's different models. Opus is the best model. It uses more tokens or more data. And so you run out faster. It even has a warning like, hey, you're using the heavier one, you're going to run out of data faster. And other people have probably seen this now in ChatGPT or other tools. And, you run out of time and it says, you need to upgrade or, wait till, noon before you can do it again. So that still happens. If you're using different things, you can use the Claude chat, or you can use a different language model like Sonnet or some other ones. I still, in terms of our thing, we're on the lowest tier team plan. Before that, I was on the lowest individual plan, and it will let you do ad hoc addition of hours. So instead of upgrading from 20 to the $100 plan, you can just sort of do 20. And then if you needed to just do a task and pay it an extra $2, you can just say, yes, run this task now. I'm, working on this thing. I'm sort of in the zone. I want to complete it. And you can just pay the $2. And it will, finish that task. You don't have to wait till noon to run it again. Although there are a lot of times where, I sort of have certain things I'm working on, and I'll sort of, will sort of, check in a few times throughout the day and just sort of say, oh, now I have a new session. I can sort of ask it to do a bunch of stuff as sort of, and starting to plan my week around a little bit. Like I'll, do Cowork and then do some other stuff, and then do Cowork and do some other stuff. And sort of back and forth. I think I'm hearing some other people that are doing that. I also start small with the task, like, in the forma one, I said, create it for one location, then do the second location, and then add the next locations. In the estimate tool, I started with just summarize the hours. And I think that's helpful to sort of, make sure you have one step done before all of a sudden you've wasted all of your credits creating this super fancy estimate tool. And like I said, and it's still saying like, it's the input is like how many hours you're working. And so you have to like correct that part first in my mind before you get too far along. I've also had some times where I needed like 10 spreadsheets updated. And I would say, here's 10 spreadsheets, update them all. And it'll make the same mistake on all 10 spreadsheets, use up all your credits. And then you have to sort of go back and say, okay, now just up this one spreadsheet and then get that one right before you do it. So just sort of try to have it all working correctly before you roll it out, across the board. But it's so tempting To just say, here's 10 spreadsheets, do it all. And if credits weren't an issue, that would be fine. But I think that it is easy to use up these credits. And always review the work. I think that there are definitely still errors, the same way you would check the work of a junior analyst or something like that. You need to make sure you're checking it. Here's some other use cases. Originally, when I was doing this talk or signed up for talk, I had another one around creating financials, but I think it's easier just to have two in more detail. But it'll create, profit and loss, balance sheet, do different things. We use this for a client that was using QuickBooks Self-Employed that doesn't have a balance sheet. So there was no way to really reconcile the end of year numbers for taxes. And so we sort of said, great, let's use this tool, Cowork, to sort of create some financials, and then we can sort of check it against the data out of QuickBooks Self-Employed. For checks that have sort of the the main data not populated, we've had it create import files. So instead of somebody having to go in and look at each check and create a data, we've had it look at those and create an import file, and same for like CSV imports from PDFs and things like that for when we have scrubbed bank info. Another really useful tool that our tax team using is a working trial balance creation. So we would upload basically a GNL, and then we had a template of what we wanted the working trial balance to look like initially, and then it would create the working trial balance, the adjusting journal entries, look at stuff like fixed assets, like if it was maybe the general ledger had an expense, $5,000 computer equipment as an expense, and it would, change that to a fixed asset and do some of those types of analysis. And we trained it, and now we have it trained. So now that all we need to do is just upload the GNL, and it'll create those. And we created one for each different return type because there's different nuances with those. Contract updates, like if we're signing up a new customer, we'll have it do that. I was doing some table assignments where I needed to sort of segment different people. So it was for a networking group I'm in, and we needed to segment out board members to sit at different tables, and we needed to segment different committee members to sit at different tables, and newer members versus old members. And I basically gave it all the inputs and said, "Here's the attendees. Can you do it?" And the attendees itself weren't even the list that I got. It was formatted with different names, like different spellings of names. Like maybe it was I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but it was and it also was formatted. It said like 1 period, first attendee, 2 period, second day. So I couldn't do VLOOKUPs and things like that. But it went in and did that really well. And it was super fun because it checks it. It says, great, I was able to do this. There was a few tables that because there was, so many committee members that, they had to sit at the same table, and it sort of made apologies, but it was like, yeah, this worked out really well. So I was super excited about it. And I think this is a time where I can see if anybody else has anything that they want to share on other use cases, because I'm sure that people have tons of use cases that they could share. But since there's nobody else on this call, I will go on and talk about getting started. So basically all you do is you go to Claude.ai, you subscribe. There's the 2 plans. The team plan is what we just upgraded to. So it's a little more expensive. It has a 5-seat minimum, but we were happy paying that for the extra security. The next part is you install it on your computer. And then once you're in the computer, you enable the Cowork mode and settings. There's another step here that I should probably add to not train the model. I'm going to write that down. And then you select a folder and try it out. So that's all I had. So I would normally open up for questions. There's one other slide, or a couple of slides that I had. I don't think there's anything that important, but I have some appendix slides because people ask about it, like what different things are. This is talking about skills. I think this is sort of a cool concept when you get further along, where instead of every time explaining, the preferences and tone of voice, you can sort of say write a proposal, and then you already have those saved skills. So it already knows all that. And that's why sometimes I'm saying I might have to iterate more on some of these tasks. And that's it. Thanks for watching.